The American Association of Municipal Executives launched its free job board. That's right, it's absolutely free for you to post your senior and executive level recruitments. So if you have an assistant director position and up that you're trying to fill in your organization, go to jobs.aame.org. That's jobs.aame.org to post your listing today. Again, it's absolutely free. So if you are a city manager, county manager listening to this, if you are an HR director, please share this with your professional networks, post it out on your listservs, get the word out because we're trying to build the only job board in the nation that is exclusively focused on senior and executive level recruitments. Again, that's jobs.aame.org. Absolutely free. Post your job today. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is my buddy, Jeff Fiegenschuh. Jeff, you've been a big supporter of mine for a while, and for the longest time, I've struggled with how to pronounce your name. I had Rob Boyer, an Illinois manager, on a few months back, and he pronounced your name for me and gave me a verbal cue because I've always struggled, and I'm pretty damn good with with names, but man, I've always struggled with it. But anyway, welcome to the podcast. And where what is your ethnic background with that name?
Well, first of all, thank you, Joe, for inviting me on. I'm a longtime listener and obviously, yes, a longtime supporter, and I'm honored to be here. Your list of past guests is pretty incredible, so I hope to emulate what they've done in the past. So, again, thank you for allowing me to be on the podcast. So, I'm actually adopted, and my family history is German, and my last name is actually Bavarian, and I know that because I had a city clerk who was into genealogy, researched that for me and told me our family's originally from southern Bavaria. But I was born in '75 in Sidney, Nebraska, and my birth mom, gave me up for adoption. And the minute I was born, I was shuffled into the next room and to my parents that adopted me. And so I'm very blessed and am an advocate for adoption services.
Oh wow! I didn't know about the adoption angle. So wait, so is Fagenschuh your birth mother was German, or is Fagenschuh German? I'm
Fiegenschuh is German, but everybody out in Western Nebraska is pretty much Dutch or German or English. I did do the 23andMe a few years ago, and I'm about 40% German and about 40% Irish, and the rest English.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. Okay. Adoption, man. I never didn't know. There's a lot of things I didn't. It's really wild about meeting people in person or doing a podcast with them, Jeff. After I've been on LinkedIn now for almost 3 years and building that platform, is you interact with these individuals like I interact with you on a regular basis, and you don't know them in person, but you feel like you know them a lot more than you probably do, right? Or you listen to the podcast and you hear me, and I tripped out because, well, obviously I didn't know you were adopted until just now. But secondarily, a couple weeks ago, there was a picture of you posted for, I think, the Illinois City Manager Conference down in Champaign. I think that you guys just had last month or something. And I
Yeah.
saw you with some tattoos on your arms, and I was like, wait a minute, this guy's rocking some hardcore tattoos, right?
Yeah, I do spend quite a bit of money on my tattoos. I'm very blessed. I'll talk a little bit in our conversation about our mayor and city council. They're very supportive, and the best mayor and council I've worked with in my 20 years. I've worked with a lot of really good people, but this is a very cohesive group, and we accomplish a lot. But they've been very good to me and allowed me to have that. Allow me to express my artistic value on my arms, and they're all Star Wars and comic related, so nothing too out of the ordinary. But I do love my tattoos. It's actually, if you have them, it's kind of an addiction when you get them, and you're like, "Wow, I love this. I want another one and another one." So I'll be going in for some touch-up work later this month, and I've got a couple new Star Wars ones I want to add on probably later this year or early next year.
That's pretty wild. My cousin on my wife's side, he's a tattoo artist out here in Los Angeles, and I've talked to him and others, and they all say like, hey, sometimes once you get your first tattoo, you can't stop getting them. It's just it becomes an addiction.
It does, and on social media, 90% of the stuff I follow on social media is tattoo artists and Star Wars fan pages and all these different fan pages, and I love seeing the art that other people display, and it's a good way to get ideas, creative ideas for what you wanna maybe add to your body at some points. My counsel just said nothing above the shoulders. at least while you're working and nothing on the hands. And I said, I can do that when I retire. That'll be a different story, but I can do that for now.
We not gonna see any, R2-D2 tattoos on the face anytime soon. I gotta tell you,
Nope.
Jeff, that man, the tattoo culture's gotten insane. The number of people I see with facial tattoos now is just boggles my mind. I'm like, "Wow, this is, like, really a new trend."
Yeah, no, that's one area I'm not going to do that. But definitely, I've got a couple of
I hope not.
whenever. Nope, nope, not at all. But I've got a couple of Darth Vader ones, and that I really want to put on my hands. But again, that'll be if my skin holds when I'm 60 or 62 when I call it a career.
We're not gonna get any teardrops on the, down the eye.
I,
No, yeah,
I
you
cry
guys.
enough normally. I don't need any tear. I don't need any ink on on my face. No.
Oh, man, yeah, so I saw the tattoos and I'm like, "Man, that's not, that's outside the norm, I would think, for the city management community." I would love to know, any if any city managers, listening to this podcast would like to, hit me up with a message and say, "Hey, I got tattoos," so
Well, it doesn't Brandon. I'm pretty sure Brandon has one. I
I
don't
think
know if he
so.
talks much about it. I saw on
No.
LinkedIn, and then I have a colleague up north of me in a small town north of me who's got. I know he's got a couple. I just like to talk about it because it's important to me, and it. The reason I like talking about it is because there's more to us than just being city managers, right? I mean, I love the
Amen.
city management profession, and it really is a big part of who I am, and I feel very blessed to have my career, and I would never change anything, but yeah, there's parts of me that aren't city managers, and it's bigger than being a city manager and having tattoos. And like when you and I were talking about me coming out to LA in a couple of weeks, I grew up in the '80s, so I love '80s horror, and I'm going to a Friday the 13th convention. And there's just God only gives you one chance to live your life, and you got to live it for you and your family, and not anybody else.
I'm always envious of the people who have like the little hobbies or the collections or the memorabilia. I just never been my thing. I don't have that. I'm a minimalist, I guess, by nature, and
Yeah.
with my growing up, and so I'm always kind of fascinated by the people who get into that stuff. I think it's pretty cool. It's just never really been my thing, but I am, for the audience, I can see Jeff's office. We're on video, but we don't. I'm not recording the video, and I got some interesting things to point out. I mean, there's this big black cell phone. I'm not sure what that's like. Almost like an inflatable. But the other thing
Yep.
is that I see some Red Sox gear, and then I see like a Cubs pennant kind of hidden behind there. I'm wondering what's going on with the Red Sox gear and the Cubs pennant, Jeff. What's going on there?
Well, my staff is very good to me. I love my staff to death, and so one year, one of my staff
Oh, you know
members
what, Jeff?
gave.
We failed. I failed. I dropped the ball on the
Yeah,
introduction, and I got so
yeah.
excited to talk about your name and the tattoos. You are outside of the Chicagoland area. You're in Rochelle, Illinois, so you are a Red Sox fan, but you have a lot of Cubs, I assume, fans on staff.
I do, and so I have that in my office, but I hide it. I am a huge Red Sox fan. I love them. I don't root against the Cubs unless they play the Red Sox. You can't see my entire office, but I've got a Captain America flag hanging up and some Darth Vader leadership principles hanging up, and then I have my huge Red Sox flag on the other side of the office. Yeah.
Did you by chance catch the recent Netflix documentary, the Clubhouse or whatever about the Red Sox? Have you aware of that one?
I am aware. I have not watched it. I did watch the documentary on the 2003 2004 team.
Yeah,
That was really good. No, I haven't. I'll watch it. Last year they were mediocre at best, and they probably could have picked a bunch of other teams to do a documentary on. But Jaron Duran is my favorite player on the Red Sox. So I will eventually watch it because he had a very, very candid discussion about mental health
he did.
and the importance of mental health and some of the things he went through. And, I listened to your podcast this week. I forget which episode it was, but the episode where you talked about the book you wrote and you talked about some of the challenges you're going through. And
Yeah.
it's mental health is big, and it's nice to have folks like you and Jaron out there talking about that issue. That's something that we all deal with, and so I'll eventually get to it. But I'm going to watch it because I have so much respect for him and what he brings to the game and the causes that he advocates for.
It's really well done, and he's obviously a major feature, key player in that documentary. And what I found interesting about him coming out and talking about that mental health is, man, like I know the world's changed a little bit and the game's changed, but it's still rough. I mean, it's one thing for me to talk about mental health issues or for the average person. It's another thing for a professional athlete to talk about those things, those personal vulnerabilities and weaknesses when you know you're going to go into the lion's den every other week on a road trip, right, to basically go play against the other team, and they're going to throw that in your face, and that's pretty wild. And I don't know. I mean, the world's changing. Obviously, the culture's changing. I think people are more open about things than they were before when we were kids. I mean, from mental health on down to just our salaries, right? I mean, I remember when we were kids, like, you didn't even ask adults what they made, or that was just never even talked about, or politics or religion. And obviously things are much more transparent in that regard. But yeah, it's a really well done documentary on the Red Sox. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. So
Yeah, thanks. And I just real briefly before we get into it, I did want to talk about. I love your podcast. Episode 114 was the one where you talked about some of the challenges you're going
yeah,
through in the book you wrote. So I won't. We won't rehash it because I don't want to. We're I want to be positive here, but I just want you to know there's a lot of us out there that support you, and I really appreciated the rawness and how candid you were, and just the honesty and the pauses that you had, and just you could tell it was coming from from deep inside your soul, and that really translates, and I relate to that a lot. And so anyway, thank you for that. And I'm also so glad I'm in Rochelle because I listened to the podcast about the city manager who was arrested or has that warrant out for his arrest. And I'm like,
yeah.
wow, there's some crazy stuff that goes on out in the world today.
Yeah, I literally just, we're recording this podcast on Tuesday, and I just did recorded part two of that interview series with the reporter that's going to go out for tomorrow because he has been arrested now, and we're going to update that story. Getting back to the mental health component, episode 114. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. I didn't really want to talk about it. The only reason why I did, honestly, is because I kind of felt like I was running out of tools in my arsenal to kind of fix myself. And so and I've like, my fragility, I guess, is something that's kind of been a little bit disturbing and concerning to me because I'm so used to being able to compartmentalize my life and kind of get through it. And I needed to do something to kind of snap myself out of it. I'm happy to report that since I did put that out there and I gave myself that 1 week deadline and kind of forced myself to pull my head out of my ass and kind of get going, I'm in a much better place now. Like, I'm not close to being 100% to where I was like pre all the stuff going down, but I'm definitely in first gear. I got the book out for the contract negotiations, which I'm really proud of, and I think a lot of people are going to get value out of. And
So
yeah, I think things are going to start really picking up again on the things I've been working on and my activities. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate you acknowledging that. Like I said, it wasn't really a conversation I wanted to have, but I'm glad I did it.
yeah,
Yeah, and I got
I
really good
appreciated it,
feedback
man.
on that. Yeah, thank you. I got really good
Of
feedback
course.
from people. There were a lot of individuals who said, "Hey," in fact, I just had a call a couple days ago from somebody who's going through a tough situation. They just got notified that they're being let go from due to budget crunch. Budget crunch is this is an assistant city manager, and so they're in a very tough situation because their life's being turned upside down. And they just said, "Hey, I listened to the episode, and although I'm going through something entirely different, like, I totally understand where you're coming from, and it means a lot." And so yeah, Jeff, it's you know, that's why we're here, though, right? I mean, I
Right.
do the podcast because I want to be real. I want to be authentic. I want to communicate something of value to folks. Like, I'm just not trying to have a chit chat session or, shooting the breeze at the bar, over a glass of beer. Like, I really want to do something meaningful and substantive with this podcast, and that's why I do it. So, no, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. Well, so one of the things I've always wanted to mention to you, and I always forget, we always have these great things we bring up in our mind. It's like, I want next time I talk to that individual, I'm going to bring that up. And of course,
Yeah.
I never do. We never do. I love the intro to your podcast. It reminds me of Sergio Leone, spaghetti western, and so
Uh
I
huh.
wanted to compliment you. I love the intro. It's great, and every time I listen to you, I think of the man with no name walking onto the streets in for a few dollars more, a fistful of
Yeah.
dollars, or
Yeah.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or you name any of one of his movies. But anyway, it's a great intro, and it reminds me of a great Sergio Leone spaghetti western.
Well, it's funny you say that because I've had a couple people mention this before about the theme of the podcast, and I don't think I've ever really talked about it on this podcast. So, when I was launching, I was trying to figure out how I was going to get some music, right? And it's very complicated and difficult to get actual fit music done by artists that you might like, like if I want to put Tool or something on, or
Right.
something, or Red Hot Chili Peppers, like, that's good luck with that, right? Not going to happen. And so there's these services out there where you can buy royalty free music. You pay a one-time fee or whatnot to get the intro. And the song I had, originally picked out that I wanted to use, my wife vetoed. She said, "No, that's too heavy. It's too dark or whatever." And I was like, but it really like resonated with me. And so I had to go back to the drawing board because obviously the wife wins on those discussions, those battles.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I kept on thumbing through and I came across the theme that I use to this day. And I was like, "Oh, that just sort of hits," and we both agreed, and it was like, it's 100%. Like, so I am a big Pulp Fiction fan, and I'm also a big Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns fan, and we felt like that song kind of hit on some of those notes. If you're a Pulp Fiction fan, I
Yep.
think you kind of
Yep.
sense a little bit, and then
Yep.
also we felt it was like a Lone Ranger, like, hey, coming to save the day, like
Right.
fighting for city manager. So it just seemed to work, right? And I'm a big fan of it. So yeah, thank you for acknowledging it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
So totally random.
Yeah.
Man, this intro is running long, but please bear with
That's
us,
okay.
folks. But so I was thumbing through Facebook recently. This is probably about 6 months ago, and I was going through Facebook, and there was this ad for some sort of like mop or kitchen cleaner or something like, I forget what it was. I and whatever, and they were using the same my theme song. They must have got it from the same service for their ad. It was pretty funny.
Nice.
So I'm like, wait a minute, that was like really surreal because I've never heard it outside of the podcast.
I think you'd be surprised the number of people that go to those locations for the free, because you don't want to have copyright infringement. So you go to
Yes,
those sites. And I'm sure that if you really did your research, you would find your intro in numerous other advertisements across the country.
probably it was like the best $49 I ever spent or whatever it was. So
Absolutely. For sure.
well, anyway, Jeff Fiegenschuh, he's the city manager for Rochelle, Illinois, and wanted to talk about some things that you've been working on the local media front and community engagement. I reached out to you recently because I said, "Hey, Jeff, I do my weekly news scans, and on a regular basis, I will come across a column you've written for the local newspaper, and you're basically communicating to your residents." I'm a fan of that, and I don't think enough city managers actually engage in that activity. And I said, so let's just come on the podcast and kind of talk about it and discuss it. And so that's why I wanted to have you on here. That was the main introduction for us to get together to talk about that, because I really do think that city managers can do a much better job when it comes to getting their voice out into the community. And I just kind of wanted you to unpack a little bit how this whole thing came about and what the process was, so maybe other city managers can use it as an example to maybe pursue opportunities in their local community.
Yeah. So if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to introduce my community too. I think my community is more
Yeah,
important than I am. So I've been blessed to be the city manager in Rochelle, Illinois, since 2017. So September 11th, actually, unfortunately, it's a bad date in our history, but a good date for me. That's when I started in Rochelle in 2017. So I'm almost been here 8 years. I'm their longest serving city manager. Rochelle's located about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Chicago on Interstate 88, 20 miles south of Rockford on Interstate 39. And so it's a great community. We're known as the hub city. The Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and the Union Pacific have a diverging diamond in our community. So they both come right through our community. And I've been very blessed. And when I was hired in 2017, the mayor and council at the time really wanted their next city manager. There was a lot of things they wanted their next city manager to focus on, but one of them was transparency and open government, and having more accessible government, not just to the residents, but also to the mayor and city council. Like, we're talking about the article I write for the newspaper and our efforts to be more engaging with our public, but I think city managers should be more engaging with their mayor and city councils too. I mean, I meet with my mayor all the time, and I meet with my council members once every other week, sometimes once a week, depending on the issues at hand. Meet with them, and we go over the agenda and all these other things. So, but engagement was a big priority for them, and so when I was hired, that we sit down as a staff. As a new city manager, they always ask you, what are you going to do in the first 90 days? And the answer
right.
for me is always get to know the community and the organization. How can you make changes when you don't know the dynamics of the community? And I would argue it takes more than 3 months to do that. Sometimes it takes years. And I've been very blessed to become more ingrained in the community. I'm originally from Sydney, Nebraska, but this is my adopted home now. I feel like Rochelle is home, and the people in the community have been very good to me. So, but yeah, it's a priority for council. And so over the first couple of months, I really learned about the organization. I talked to staff, I talked to the mayor and council, I talked to people in the community, and try to find out what they wanted more from their city government. I mean, one of the first things we did, which was super simple, we started televising our city council meetings on Facebook and Facebook Live and on YouTube, and it's just a great way to get your not only get your message out, but to show people we don't have anything to hide. Like if you've
Right.
got questions, watch the council meeting. If you still have questions, come talk to us. But we're here to serve you. I mean, I we talk all the time at the staff level. We're only here because people pay their utility bills and they pay their taxes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
our job is to create an environment for our business to grow and thrive and to provide good quality services for our residents in an impartial way and in a cost effective way. And so part of that is just, opening up your city government. So yeah, that's worked out well. I do write an article monthly for the newspaper. And again, Rochelle is very blessed to be a community of our size, to have still a local newspaper. And we also have a radio station in town that the mayor and I and our department heads will go once a month, not all together, separately. And he'll interview us and talk about different things that are going on at the city, whether it's infrastructure investment or new businesses coming to the community or things like that. So yeah, we really try to be engaging. Jenny Thompson, who is our community relations director and my assistant, does a fantastic job with engagement in the community. She's her and our whole staff does a great job, right? It's not just any one person. We all meet together and talk these things out. And so,
Well, Jeff, it sounds like you have a cultural sort of imperative within the organization to be open and transparent with the local media. I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because I, generally speaking, have a very skeptical, oppositional, antagonistic viewpoint of media in general, especially at the macro national
mhm,
level, I will say, right? But I also think that the local level, they get beat up too much, and I think there's a little bit too much skepticism and too much sort of negativity and this sort of, I've been thinking about how I wanted to approach this conversation with you, and I was thinking about this last night, and I just wrote this actually in the book, right, the City Manager's Guide to Contract Negotiations. I mentioned this a little bit, and that is, we have this overwhelming sense or belief right now that the toxicity that we're seeing in government at the national and state levels that we used to think were kind of confined to those arenas has kind of drifted and started to permeate the local government arena, right? We see greater toxicity, partisan politics at the local level. And I think we are guilty of that as city managers and local governments in some ways, of looking at the media, and we sometimes take maybe a jaded or oppositional antagonistic viewpoint of how the media acts at the national level, and we automatically have a default sort of persona or interaction with our local officials, or sorry, our local journalists. And my experience within my communities has always been that the local journalists actually don't have an axe to grind. They just want to get information so they can give content to their readers. And I would like to see, maybe, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'd like to, for the city managers who are listening to this podcast, to start maybe reassessing that relationship, and maybe let's dial it back and maybe restart it and say, hey, can we get off on a better foot with our local media? Because I don't think they're always looking for the gotcha moment.
no, they're not. And, they're just covering the news. Now, if you give them a gotcha moment, they're going to cover it as they should. That's their obligation to do so. But we also have an obligation at the city to get information out to our residents. And there's multiple ways to do that, like through social media, but the newspapers, I shouldn't say the newspaper, the local media, right? Because we have
Right.
radio as well. The local media is a great way to do that. And again, their job is to provide content to their readers. And I do think they do it in a very fair and impartial way. And do they ask tough questions? Again, yeah, absolutely, as they should. But if you have your information and you have your message ready to go, you should be able to handle tough questions. But as long as we have local media, we need to utilize them. I mean, when we're part owners in a power plant in Southern Illinois that the state of Illinois is targeted for closure in 2040, I think 2042, and obviously we wanted to keep it open because we have long term power contracts with them, and we utilized all media to help sell our story a couple years ago, and they covered it very well. And a lot of people were like, "Wow, you guys are part owners in a power plant." They didn't even know. So that's why you have to use local media to help sell that story and to get that information out.
Right.
What I'm guilty of is giving too much information, in that I think people's habits for absorbing information today is different than when you and I were younger.
Yes.
And I'll never forget when I came here, I started we started it monthly and we went to quarterly. It was the city manager's newsletter. And it was like, I'm not kidding. It got to be like 90 pages. I loved it. Like I read it. I was geeking out over this. I loved it. And I don't know if my staff just didn't want to tell me that it was too long, but eventually we changed the format because people were just not reading it. You would put that information out there, and Jenny could tell how
It's
many
just a wall of
people were
text to the average
engaging.
person. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
But that's the thing, and I'm glad you say that, Jeff, because I think by and large, most city managers are actually guilty of trying to be too transparent, right? Because we want people to, it's like we want people to know what we're doing. We want people to be invested in the progress of the community. We want them to understand what's going on. And so I think there's this natural sort of like there's like almost like two ships crossing in the night, where it's like, it's like this fundamental misunderstanding. It's like, we talk about this all the time, right? Like how many people show up to a budget meeting or a budget hearing? It's like we can't get people to show up to a budget hearing, and then it's like people complain about the budget. Like, well, no, we're not hiding anything. We're not trying to hide
right.
anything from you. We want you there.
Yeah, but part of that, Joe, I think, is messaging too. Again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not pretending to be. I've just learned in my 23 years in this profession that people's ability to how they receive and send information has just changed because of social media and so many other things. And the budget's a perfect example, right? We have a $130 million budget at the city because we have all of the utilities. And try, I love this stuff, so I'm happy to put a 100 page PowerPoint together. But the great thing about the media is you can take that and synopsis that into a 1 page budget and brief and work with the media to get that information out
Right.
where people are going to pay attention to it. So again, they ask tough questions, and when they ask, this last year the Illinois General Assembly eliminated the grocery tax in Illinois, which was just a pass through. It was collected from the state for local cities, but they gave us the ability to reinstitute it locally. And the news media asked a lot of tough questions. Are you going to do that? And if not, where are you going to cut? And why do you need to reinstitute it? And so, and we had nothing to hide. In fact, we didn't reinstitute it, and we're not going to need to make cuts. We made some other changes, but that's what I love about the media is they're there to ask those questions and
Yeah.
help sell the story.
Well, and the thing too, you mentioned something about the gotcha moment, and I wanted to hit on this because it's been my experience. So I have a when I go to talk to the media folks in my local communities wherever I serve, there's a fundamental rule. I want every city manager, every aspiring city manager, ACM department head. I want you to understand this is a hard and fast rule. Don't break it. Okay, it's very simple. Never lie to the media. Okay, never lie. There's no benefit to lying. They're going to catch you eventually. If they do, it's just going to be horrendous. So I would always tell my media contacts, I go, look, very simple. One, I'm never going to lie to you. I'm always going to tell you the answer if I have the answer. And if I can't give you the answer for some reason, maybe it's personnel, confidential, whatever, then I'm going to tell you bluntly, like, hey, I can't communicate to you about this right now. But I'm not hiding anything. And what happens
Right?
is when you are voluntarily telling them people and you're committing to them and you're also proactively engaging with them, right? So if you're letting them know things that are happening instead of letting them find out through the grapevine, right, where they feel like you're trying to hide something, it's been my experience that one, you can help frame the narrative. And I don't mean that to sound in a negative, manipulative context, but if you are actually proactively engaging with your media, you can actually help shape the narrative, one. And two, if they do find out something negative that they haven't heard from you for whatever reason, I find that I'm more likely to get the benefit of the doubt from the local media before they run a story and they find out what's going on from me. Does that make sense?
It does, and if people were watching this on YouTube, everything you just said, they would have saw my head nodding, yes. I agree with everything you've said. What I found with the media when we work with them is it's okay to say, "I don't know. I'll get
Yeah.
back to you. I don't know." Either I or somebody from the team will get back to you.
Yes.
But I also, just to relate back to your previous statements, again, I'm gonna use our electric power prices in the country are fluctuating on the upward trend, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And we're a little bit shielded from that in Rochelle because we have long-term power contracts and we have local generation that we can do behind the meter. Not to bore anybody, but when the average person in Rochelle sees all these articles about power prices going up 30%, that may not be and it's not the case in Rochelle. So I send all that information to my local newspaper person and I'm like, hey, if you ever want to write a story on how power markets work and how they're affected by policy and how those power markets affect Rochelle, let's do it. Anytime you want. And we actually just did a story on that. So again, setting the narrative is what I would define that. We're not manipulating anything. It's just
Right.
there's just a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to this specific subject. So let's send it to the media, and when they're ready to do a story, we can frame that narrative and work with them to get a story out there that's accurate.
Right, and there's a tremendous amount of nuance to a lot of these issues that's hard to communicate in a 30-second soundbite, that's so
Oh,
long
for
form
sure.
content is very important. Jeff, something I've been trying to communicate for a long time in the podcast in some form or fashion on my LinkedIn posts, even recently in the book, the contract negotiation, the city manager's guide to contract negotiations, is this idea that we as city managers, if we are not playing in the sandbox and we are not engaging with the public, if we are not in the arena, so to speak, like actively engaged, nobody knows who we are. And if nobody knows who you are, they don't know what you're doing, what you're contributing to the organization, to the community. One is they don't know what the city manager does as an entity, right? As an actual title, as an actual job. They don't understand what your role is. One, but two, they are not invested in you as a person or as an individual. And so, one of the things I talk about on this platform and through AME and everything else is like, we want to try to lengthen these tenures. We want to create greater sense of like job security, minimize the risk, the cost of turnover. And I think one of the fundamental things that's so important about what you're doing with the column, and again, one of the reasons why I want to have you on here is that when you're engaging with the public in the way that you are connecting with them. And is one important way of helping to increase your tenure, right? Your job security. Because if say something goes, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but let's just say
Yeah.
something goes south in Rochelle at some point, right? Or there's some issue, or get sideways with one of your members on the governing body. Well, now that you've spent all these years of goodwill working with the local media, working with the community or what have you, there's more investment in you and your future in that organization. Whereas a lot of times I think a lot of our peers, they fall in this trap of being burned in this community, burned in that community, and they want to say, "Hey, I'm apolitical. I'm not in politics," and they have this naive sort of idea that if they just retreat and like sort of insulate themselves from it all, that they will not be victimized again by some of these components. But the reality is, you just become a no-name, faceless entity person that nobody's invested in, and you're just kicked to the curb. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
It does, and I agree with that. I think it's a nuanced subject, right? I mean, I also
Yeah,
think that as city managers, we have to have a life outside of the city hall, and I my kids are all grown and out of the house, and so I have a lot more free time after 5 or 6 as compared to some of our colleagues who have young kids,
absolutely.
right? So
Yep.
being engaged in the community can become more difficult, but you don't have to, and I think that as city managers, again, this is just my philosophy. It doesn't work for everybody. As a city manager, I've always been engaged in the communities that I've worked, whether it's serving on the chamber board or being involved in Rotary or serving on a community foundation board. I'm very active and engaged in Rochelle and plan to stay that way. And I enjoy it. And yes, does it maybe is maybe a positive outcome of that more job security? Possibly. But I do it because I enjoy it and I enjoy volunteerism. I think that that's kind of how God wired me
Yep.
is to do things like that. But it doesn't always work that way, right? Like, so you talk about maybe you have some issues with a person on the governing body. I'm also a big advocate, and I know one person doesn't constitute the entire governing body, but it only takes one person, as you've stated in previous podcasts. What your past city, the gentleman from
Yeah,
We,
Tim Rundle.
yes, it only takes one person to, and this is not just true of the governing body. You can have a great street department, a great police department, and if you make one wrong hire, it can really mess with the culture of that department
Absolutely.
and move it in a what you would deem as not a positive direction. So I would just say that if I ever got crossways with our elected officials, even if I had a lot of support in the community, I also believe that they're the elected officials and I serve at their will. I serve at the community's will, but through the city council. And that being involved in every organization and everybody in town loving you, which is never the case, they could all love you. But if the 7 people at the dais don't love you, you have an obligation to start looking for another job because
100%.
they are the elected officials. But yeah, engagement in the community. But again, you don't have to be in Rotary and all these other organizations. Like I go speak at Rotary, I go speak at the Kiwanis Club. We used to have a League of Women Voters before, and a lot of those folks aged out and that organization went away. Every year I would go speak to them at their annual meeting. We've got an economic development group that the mayor and I go update every month. So engagement doesn't just mean belonging to organizations. It means going out and actively seeking folks in the community to talk about the city, to talk about what you do as a city manager, to talk about what you do outside of your job as a city manager. If you've got kids, maybe I can help coach the little league team. I
Yeah.
mean, it's engagement isn't just about going to some stuffy meeting. It's about
It's
getting
touching.
involved in the
It's those touch points, right? It's touching it,
absolutely, the touch
those
points
points of
and getting
contact.
involved in the yes, and getting involved in the culture of the community. So I have a good enough relationship with some folks now where they'll invite me to, this thing called Cutting the Square, which is like back in the day, we used to cruise Maine. That's what they called it in Rochelle, Cutting the Square. And it was a classic car show, and they wanted me to come and just look at all the cars because we have a relationship built. And I value that, not as a city manager, but as a human being. And I'm like, wow, thanks for inviting me. I know I'm there kind of as a city manager, but you're also inviting me because we're humans and we enjoy those connections together. And my dad collects classic cars, and so I will enjoy what you guys are doing. But yeah, it's part of that's being engaged in the community. And yeah, do you put yourself out there more and potentially allow for some negative things to happen? You absolutely do, and you have to be cognizant of that. I've allowed that to happen in the past, and I've learned from that. But you're also right to the other extreme. If you insulate yourself, you'll have no support. So when something does happen, you're not going to have the support probably of the community, possibly of your mayor and council, and as importantly, your staff.
Yeah, but I intrinsically believe I just fundamentally believe that the average person wants to do good, wants to see good things. I don't think there's obviously there's bad apples, bad seeds, but I think you as a city manager, I mean, I'm the royal you, right? The royal city managers who are listening here, it's like, if you're engaging the community, I think people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're going to look at you differently, and I mean that in a positive way. And I just think that's something that's I get why there's a lot of pullback and a reticence on the part of our peers to maybe be
Yeah.
distant. I get all that, but you got to look at the long game too and say, hey, at the end of the day, we are serving this community, and the more invested I am in these people, the better it's going to be for them and for me.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, just those personal connections, right? And so, again, I kind of off to the side here. I have a city council member who used to collect comic books and records, and they were sitting in a closet for years. And had I not made it a point to get to know my council and learn what they did, when they were in their careers or what they valued, and then they learned what I valued, I wouldn't have been able to make that connection. And I bought all of his old comics. And that's a very lighthearted, but again, it's about
Yeah.
those personal connections, right? If you don't make an effort to ingrain yourself, if you don't make an effort to get to know people, then you're more isolated. And just as a type A extrovert, isolation is the thing that scares me the most.
Absolutely. That's such a great point, Jeff. And what something I've talked about in past episodes is connecting with our governing body where they're at, right? Like I think oftentimes
Mm.
we think like, okay, we're at City Hall, we're the city manager, this is our domain, this is where we interact with our council. But I think, going on to this whole community engagement thing, we don't expect residents to just come to city council meetings and engage with them, right? When we do community engagement, we engage with them on town halls or coffee with the city manager, or some sort of family night, or cutting the square, or whatever the case might be, right? We're talking about different forms of community engagement, is us going out to the community and interacting with them, right? And I think the point you just made about the comics and your council member is we as city managers need to go and meet our council members where they are in life, right? Many of these folks are
Absolutely.
volunteers, right? They got lives outside. They got their family obligations, their business obligations, and what have you. And I'm reminded of a story of Jorge Garcia. He's the Pismo Beach, California city manager. And when I did the interview with him, we had to, he was slated to go with a one-on-one meeting for his council member, but one of the council members, I forget who it is, he or she likes to walk. Like they had like a walking time, right? So he, as a city manager, would make a plan to go walk with his council member for an hour, and while they're walking, he would basically download them on everything that's going on with the community, and that's how he's connecting with his council member. So I think when we talk about community engagement, you can apply the same fundamental core values or tenets with your elected officials.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's actually a great strategy. And if I had a council member that was an avid walker like that, I would definitely do that. I have one council member who is a police officer in another
I
jurisdiction.
just hope one's not a furry. I mean, I've
No, 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 not at all. Not at all. No, no, I have a council member who's a police officer in another jurisdiction, and his schedule is just it's more hectic than mine. So typically, the only time he can meet, because I don't ever want to intrude on their family time either. Right, family
right.
time is very important, and I had my family time, and one of the things that I would change if I could was I would have been better at being home with my kids.
Set those boundaries.
Absolutely, but so we meet at like 6 or 6:30 a.m. On Thursday mornings, and go through the agenda because that's the time he has available. And so I don't have a problem with that. I'll meet him on the weekends. Some can't, the mayor's here a lot, so I get to meet with him more often, just because of the nature of his schedule. But yeah, you meet them where they're at, but not just for meetings. You meet your mayor and council where they're at policy wise too, right? I mean, our job is to implement policy, and yeah, we can make
100%.
recommendations, but you try to meet them where they're at policy wise too. Otherwise, you're not going to be in your job very long.
100%, 100%. So let's get back a little bit more to the nuts and bolts of what you've been doing because I wanted to talk
Mhm.
more about that column and also you're doing some of that radio show stuff because I think the
Yep.
column and the radio hits are something that virtually every city manager who's listening to this podcast can really start implementing, right? And
Yep.
so what you're doing right now with your local paper is you have a once a month column in which you basically write about essentially whatever you want to write about, right? And why don't you talk to us about how that came to be? When did you start doing that? Did you go to the newspaper and ask for the space to do it? Did they invite you to do it? Just kind of walk us through that a little bit.
So I actually started writing articles when I was the city manager in Princeton back in 2008. It started, somebody had wrote a letter to the editor, and I was younger then and was like, what the heck? I'm going to respond to this letter to the editor criticizing the city. And actually, my response was well written, and I had several council members compliment me on that. But the newspaper was extremely complimentary, and they said, "Hey, you're actually a pretty decent writer. Would you mind doing a column for us once a month?" And so I've just been doing it ever since. And when I did not ask the Rochelle news leader to do a column, they asked me, and I said, "Absolutely. What do you want me to talk about?" And they said, "Whatever you want to talk about, city stuff, you pick." So it's usually a kind of a, to use the Jeopardy term, potpourri. It's just
Yeah.
a different mixture. When it's budget season in December, I talk about the budget, but I really like to talk about not necessarily the nuts and bolts of government. I like to talk about larger themes like leadership and culture because as a city manager, our job is twofold. I think it's the Athenian oath. It's to leave the city better than you found it. I believe that with every fiber of my being. And that's a shout out to the Athenian program through the College of Charleston. And it's to build leadership capacity in the organization. Like you're supposed to work yourself out of a job. Like if I leave
Great point.
tomorrow.
I mean, I love that you said that. That's yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just love that.
Yeah. And the reason is because when you leave, if there's chaos and nobody can make a decision, everybody's afraid to make a decision, they're worried about the consequences, then are you really an effective leader? And I'm not being critical of anybody. This is all my leadership philosophy and how I've managed over the 23 years or how I've evolved as a manager. I trust me, when I came out of grad school with an MPA thinking I knew everything, this was not my leadership philosophy. But through learning from great people in Illinois, because we've got some of the best city managers in the country in this state, I've learned that. And you build leadership capacity and you work yourself out of a job, meaning that if you leave, the organization just, yes, there's always going to be hiccups. I'm not trying to make it sound like rainbows and sunshine all the time, but literally the organization just continues to move.
It should be next man or woman up, right?
Absolutely. And so I try to talk about themes like that in the article because that's not just city. Like I think most people can relate to that, right? Like one of my council members is the HR director at a local bank, and I'm sure that in her organization they think about culture and they think about those types of things. What are we going to do when the bank president leaves, or how do we prepare for that? So it's cross career, cross generation talking about themes like that. So I most of my articles really aren't necessarily city related. They're more leadership and 30,000 foot level things like that. But when it's important to talk about city projects, I do. In fact, our finance director is retiring this year, and the article I wrote this that I finished up yesterday was a 500 word thank you to her and her hard work over the last 22 years and all of the wonderful accomplishments the city has seen under her and mine and the city mayor, most importantly, mayor and city council and past city manager leadership. So I wanted to thank her for her dedication. So that's kind
Awesome.
of how my article goes. And, and I also told, but I have a good relationship with the newspaper. So I said, if there are themes you want me to cover, if I'm missing something, tell me. Like, if you want me to focus more on city projects, I will do that. You tell me if there's something you want me to focus on. And
Right. Yeah,
it's worked out well.
absolutely. Yeah, you said that they invited you, but I would encourage the audience, like, hey, I wouldn't wait for the newspaper to invite you
Yeah.
because you might be waiting a long time. They might not even think to even invite you to do it. But if you reach out and say, hey, I'd be interested in writing a column to kind of communicate what's going on with the community on a regular basis, I'm sure a lot of them would leap at it because at the end of the day, a lot of these local papers, as we know, one is they're going away because they don't have the resources, or they're not financially viable. The ones who are sticking around have limited resources to really go out and get the news cover. So a lot of times they're begging for content, right? And if you can give them
Th-
that content for them, that's going to help them out big time.
And yeah, and quite honestly, they do such a good job. Equate it to the city manager, like the editor of our paper, the assistant editor who covers the meetings. This gentleman covers every meeting, every meeting. Like I'm like, how do you even have a personal life?
Yeah,
And so I mean, I really look at this individual. I don't treat anybody less than me. I always look at everybody as an equal to me because I'm no better than anybody else. But I really look at what he does very similar to what I do, and I'm like, it can be taxing, and you're at meetings all the time, and all he's trying to do is cover these meetings and get the story out and get content to his readers and make sure that there's an educated populace out there. And to lose that, a lot of communities, I bet you if you did some research and you started looking at political strife and different types of issues in communities, it would be where there's a lack of local media.
I agree. There's a big void that's going to be coming down the road in the next 10 to 20 years in America, because a lot of these local papers are going away, and outside of the
Mhm.
local news coverage, who's going to get the information out about what's going on with the local? And we can get into accountability and watchdog things. I mean, we can go into a whole Tiffany Dalton and
Right.
and whatnot, and everything else in Illinois. I mean, there's a lot of things that are disconcerting about the evolving landscape about local media and where that's going and what impact that's going to have on our civic discourse, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
let's talk more about the column though. So, do you have free reign to write whatever you want to write about? And have you ever felt the need, or have you felt like you have an obligation to run columns by your governing body? Can you walk us through maybe how you navigate those potential landmines?
Yeah, I haven't. No, my mayor and council have been very good, and they don't really micromanage me. So it depends on the topic. So if we're talking about, the other thing the news media does though is he covers our council meetings, and I meet with him with department heads. And if elected officials need to be brought in, we'll bring in a council member, the mayor, in. And we meet with him once a month as well, outside of my column, to talk about the different issues and projects that are going on at the city. So a lot of times, if I
Wait.
cover it in my
I
article,
want to,
but
I want to. Sorry to interrupt you there, Jeff. I want to make
yeah,
sure we got this straight. You're saying that you and your staff, and even a member of the governing body, will regularly, on a monthly basis, go meet with the publisher of the local paper and have a sit down.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
So
I don't think a lot of managers are doing that.
no, and so he'll send us topics he wants to talk about, and it's usually based on the previous city council meeting or some other trends that are going on. It's not always the elected officials. I'll pull them in if so. When we did during COVID, I had the mayor sit in on some of them because some of the initiatives were. I want to make sure our mayor and council get credit for this. This is their policy, right? Like
Right.
we can bring it up and recommend it, but it doesn't happen without their support and their backing. And so, if it calls for it, we'll bring elected officials in to talk. A good example is we had some state reps in town last week, and the mayor was talking about home rule. And so the newspaper editor wanted to talk to me about home rule, and I said I'm happy to talk about it, but I want to be very careful, right? Because I don't want to get ahead of the mayor or any elected officials who are thinking about maybe seeing if Rochelle wants to be home rule. Like I can talk about the nuts and bolts of home rule, what it is, what
Right.
it isn't, but that's the extent of it. Then you need to reach out to Mayor Barrows and talk to him about policy specifics because that's really his realm. So I'm very cognizant of that. But typically the articles I'm talking about stuff the mayor and council have either voted on or have already discussed. And I know, having again, no relationship's perfect. Has there been strife in the past? Yes, but I know my mayor and council well enough, and they know me well enough that there's that mutual respect. I'm not going to talk about stuff that's outside of my realm, and I'm going to make sure if I cover a topic and they want to talk about it, that they're either invited or they're quoted.
Right. Well, I want to extend, I talked earlier about shaping the narrative and how that could have maybe a manipulative context. And I don't mean that, but the other thing that you can do with a column like this that you're doing on a monthly basis, Jeff, is, you can give some shine to your elected officials and let the public know like what those elected officials are doing, and communicate the project that they're supporting. Right. And that's the one way of sort of, helping your relationship with that governing body too. I mean, that's just the
Yeah,
reality of it.
it is. And again, again, in my 23 years, I've had very good mayors and city councils. And I'm not just saying this because I'm obviously going to tell them, hey, listen to this podcast. I want you guys to listen to your city manager, and I want you to hear this guy, Joe Turner, who's done a great thing for my profession. So I'm not just saying this because I know they're going to listen, but I really do have an amazing mayor and city council, and they are very supportive of staff, and they're very supportive of a lot of the strategic initiatives that we're implementing because it all ties back to the strategic plan that they approved. But they're just great to work with, and I know what the bounds are and where I should and shouldn't cross, and I always keep them in the loop, and that's where you really build trust, right? Is making sure, hey, the newspaper called and they wanted to talk about this, and there's going to be something on the Rockford news station, just so you know. Like I always give them a heads up of what's going
Right.
on, so
Right.
it's worked out
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah. So if you're, city manager listening to this podcast, I would say, hey, reach out to be proactive with your local media. See if you can get a platform to start communicating things. I would start off with being a little bit safe with the content matter. Make sure you got some, ideas of, not step on any landmines and start working through that. And then obviously, as you engage in that sort of conversation with the local media, whether it's the newspaper, whether it's the radio station, you're going to start to build up that trust, that rapport, not only with the local media but also your elected officials, and it's me a win-win. Can we talk a little bit more about the radio segment deal? Because I think that what's interesting about that is your column is you writing in your own words with your your byline, so to speak, but the radio interviews are a smorgasbord or a sampling of various city staff and council, right? So can
Yep.
you walk us through how you give your staff an opportunity to shine and also make them feel empowered and invested in the outcome of the organization by giving them that opportunity to be front and center?
Yeah, absolutely. Like probably one thing I love most about my management style, if there's something that I like, is that I don't micromanage at all. And probably sometimes that's to a fault. Like I need to be more engaged because I do have a huge amount of respect and trust for my staff. And so, yeah, I've what I've told them is if the newspaper wants to interview you or the local radio station or Rockford, that's fine. If it's something controversial, obviously I want to know about it because there's a chain of events that we need to go through to protect ourselves, but or protect the organization. But generally speaking, just give me a heads up so I can let mayor and council know you're going to be on. But who am I to talk about the fire service and policies, standard operating procedures or how to fight a fire? That's the fire chief and his command staff's job. Like city managers who think they're all knowing, that's a problem, right? Our job again is to set up a leadership chart. We have our org chart at the city is it's not the typical pyramid. It's circles everywhere that connect together because we all integrate and work together. Nobody is yes, I'm the city manager and the buck stops with me, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it's a collaborative approach to reach the consensus in those agreements. So who am I to go on there and talk about public works projects and road resurfacing or building a new substation? I want my subject matter experts there. So they go and the radio station interviews them about their projects and what they're working on. And then when we meet with the newspaper once a month to talk about projects, I make sure that the specific projects that our editor wants to talk about, the appropriate staff are there. So, we just created a new TIF in town and we're redeveloping some other properties. I want my community development director in the room to talk about that. She's the subject matter expert. She's the boots on the ground dealing. Her and her staff are the people on the ground handling and overseeing those projects. So it's important not just to let them shine, but they're the experts. They need to be there talking because they're the ones who are managing the day to day of those projects.
Yeah, Jeff, something that I've tried to communicate over the years too is that human beings are kind of funny. When they don't
Really?
get the information, yeah, when they don't
Yeah.
get the information or they feel like you're withholding something from them, they go to a very dark and negative place. And so I think that if you can be preemptively cognizant of that as an organization and say, "Hey, listen, we want to get the information out there, if you because if we hide something or even if we're just don't even think it's worth sharing because it's just not really newsworthy or whatever, human beings have a tendency to go to negative places because they feel like you're trying to hide something. And so that's why I always try to preach, as much transparency as possible. And I think it's really great what you're doing with not only the column, with the radio hits, the newsletters that you're sending out to via email. You send not only do you send out a newsletter, which I thought this was interesting. I don't know how many city managers do this. um, you send out a newsletter from the organization to the residents, and you also send out a city manager type newsletter communication to your staff, correct?
We do, and so I'm gonna clarify, I don't do anything. I help set the direction, my staff does it all, and so the newsletter was really Jenny Thompson and Jillian Condon, my HR director's idea, and part of it was we were trying to figure out how do we engage with our residents without having a 90-page newsletter. That was my idea, the 90-pager, right? Look how far that got us. They were like, "Now how do we break this down and have it so we can keep their attention and have the highlights?" And Jenny and Jillian were also, through their staff, were like, "We need more engagement with our." We did it, well, in part because of an employee survey that we did. We need more engagement with our staff, so that's why we moved in that direction. And I do write I try to write a column every month for those newsletters, but yeah, and having an engaged staff. Going back to your point, people go to a dark place if they don't feel that they're getting all the information. It's the same with staff. Like if staff feel they're left out, what are they going to think about management or leadership? Well, they don't care about us. They're not telling us anything. Your biggest advocates in the organization is not the news media. It is your frontline staff.
Right.
If your frontline staff are out there working on a water main break and somebody says, "Hey, what's this?" And I'm not saying that residents going to go up to a guy or a lady working on a water main break and ask them about a TIF project, but if they do, those staff should have some understanding of it, of a minimum of who to send them to.
Right. Or something better than, I don't know, right?
Yeah, or I don't know, right? And so engaging employees and staff is as important as engaging the public because your staff are your biggest advocates. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but they can be your biggest negative folks as well.
No, you're 100% right. They're big cheerleaders, and we all talk about in this profession about wanting to create or build organizations who are, employers of choice, right? Where people are choosing to work for you, not because they have to, because there's no other option. We want people to want to choose to work for our organizations. And one of the reasons they do that is if they do feel empowered, whether or not you're delegating authority to them, not micromanaging, whether you're giving them the authority to put their own stamp on a project or an initiative, and I think that's huge. So yeah, I think that's a very powerful. I just wanted to highlight that because I'm not sure how many city managers out there are actually sending regular communication to their staff. To be honest.
And if your staff, and again, one thing I've learned through listening to advice from city managers like Rob and listening to my leadership team is when staff have a suggestion, if it's possible, find a way to yes, right? Like find a way to implement it. Action speaks so much louder than words. Again, when all you do is give talk with no action, people lose faith in your abilities and your leadership. And so we did an employee survey a couple years ago, and one of the negative comments was, Jeff, you need to get out of the office more. You don't engage enough with the employees. My first response was, well, I'm already meetinged out. I mean, I made an excuse. I'm busy. I would love to, but I didn't prioritize right. So now I prioritize and I meet with each department. I try to meet with them all once a month and have coffee, just get to know them, or go
You're
out
talking
to
about
lunch with
you're talking
them.
about
Or
the frontline staff, not just the department
yep,
heads, right? Yeah.
yep. And so like I bought and I buy it with my own money. I went and bought donuts for the street department a couple weeks ago and just had a great time. Did we accomplish anything? Yeah, we accomplished human relationships. I mean, we didn't solve the city's problems, but I learned a lot about them. We talked about baseball. We talked about all kinds of things that we have in common and things that I didn't know about and they didn't know about me, and we humanized each other. But again, engaging with your frontline staff and your mid-level managers is super important. Again, they're your biggest spokespeople. They're the ones who are out in the community, also engaged in church and at the little league game and all these other places where I know they get asked questions about what's going on at the city.
That's great. I mean, I remember, when I was working in South Hutch, I would go down on a regular basis, a few times a year, try to go at least once a quarter and go hang out with the guys at, during lunchtime, and we'd have a, barbecue lunch or whatever on a Friday. And we're not talking about work. We're not talking about water lines. We're talking about, one of the guys fixing his car. We're talking about one of the guys side hustle on a, weekend. We're
Yep.
talking about one of those kids, what vacation they went to, or, maybe he shouldn't be getting married. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
There's some
I don't
man
know if I'd
talk
go
about.
that far. I wouldn't go there in that personal life situation. That gets you in trouble.
But in all seriousness, Jeff, it's what you talked about. It's making that fundamental personal connection with individuals that's separate from just, the hierarchy of I'm your boss, you're subordinate to me. That's how things work. And the other thing that you mentioned on, I'd like to kind of put a fine little bow
Mhm.
on it, is when staff has a suggestion, do what you can to say yes or find the yes. Because when staff is giving you suggestions, one is you are getting, again, if you implement that suggestion, not only are you empowering them to be more invested in the organization moving forward with ideas and what have you, but when you actually implement that suggestion, now they are taking ownership for making sure that that suggestion is successful or that is fruitful or that they carry through on it, right? Because that came from them.
It did. I know I agree with that, and you try to find a way to yes and be supportive. Again, they're the front. Your department directors are they're the subject matter expert for whatever department they're overseeing, right? And I'm a generalist. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm a generalist in everything, and so we rely on their advice, just like the mayor and city council rely on their city managers for advice, right? And would I want my mayor and council micromanaging me and second guessing every decision? No. So why would you do that to your team? Like, give them the ability to make decisions. Now, sometimes those decisions you might have to overrule, or sometimes those decisions might lead to a failed project. And you know what? As a city manager, then I guess I would have to take ownership of that, and I would take responsibility as the manager. Leaders, I forget the quote, but basically leaders give leader Danny Langloss, the city manager in Dixon, who's big into leadership development,
Yeah,
had some quotes once, and one of them was, "A good leader gives credit when there's success and takes the responsibility when there's failure."
yeah,
That's a synopsis of the quote, but it's very true. And but part of that is empowering your staff, and your staff are more likely to work to succeed if they know you have their back. Especially, it's easy to have somebody's back when there's a success, but
of
when there's a
course.
failure or a breakdown, that's when the trust is really either broken or cemented.
Yeah, because first of all, every organization should be willing to embrace failure. Failure is not an inherently bad thing. I think it gets a bad rap. I think people think they got to be, bat 1,000. That's ridiculous. You can learn a lot through failure. In fact, you learn a lot more through failure than you do through success. Really, when you think about it,
Yeah,
it's whether or not you want to have that controlled failure, right, within a certain boundaries or guidelines, so that you're not going off the deep end and having some massive, organizational, failure in a sense.
right.
But you need to encourage failure because that emboldens and encourages new ideas and provides a safe space, as cliche as that sounds, to give your employees the opportunity to try new things. And they know that if they're going to try something different, they're not going to have their head cut off or risk losing their job because they came up short for whatever reason.
Failure is okay as long as we learn from it and build on it, right? And we don't
Absolutely.
continue down the same road.
Well, Jeff, that's going to about do it for the show today. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a great conversation. Are there any final words or comments you'd like to add?
Just I appreciate the opportunity, Joe, for you allowing me to come on the podcast again. I've listened to pretty much every episode, and I'm in a very exclusive club of people who I have a lot of respect for across the country. And through your content on LinkedIn, I've got to know some of these folks. So thank you for allowing me to be on and to showcase Rochelle and all the wonderful things we're doing, and to talk about our amazing mayor and city council and city staff. And I do want to give a shout out to Rob Boyer, a buddy of mine over in Freeport, and Dorothy David, and who was the former city manager in Champaign, and Joan Walls, who's the current city manager, Danny Langloss in Dixon, and Bill Corrali, who's in Glencoe. These are some of the and I know I'm missing people, but these are people I know in Illinois that I've learned from. And so a lot of the stuff we talked about today, these folks are already doing. And so I've just had the opportunity to learn from some really, really good people, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the kind words, and been a pleasure to have you on, Jeff. Thank you so much. Jeff Fiegenschuh. I don't know if I pronounced 100% authentically, but Jeff Fiegenschuh with the city of Rochelle, Illinois, on the podcast today. Thank you very much, sir. I am Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. If you enjoyed the content, please hit that follow, subscribe button. Please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. Thank you very much. Catch you next week.